Ernie Cline, it is such a pleasure to meet you virtually.
Yes, it is. I think we actually met at a party once. You may not remember. It was at the
Tell me.
Entertainment Weekly party at Comic-Con, and you were at the snack table. I came up, and it was many years ago. But
I'm so sorry. I'm very terrible with. I have almost I call it semi-fame induced prosopagnosia.
Well, that was one of those. That was one of my first times at a party full of famous people, where I'm just walking around. I was just geeking out on everybody. But you had a turn for just about 5 seconds.
Well,
But
the
I'm
thing
excited
is,
to talk. Yes, I'm excited to talk to you at more length.
the thing is you and I have a whole bunch of friends in common, I believe.
It's true. I think back then Will Wheaton was the only friend that we had in common. But now I think we have more and a lot of interests. A lot of I've been a big fan of yours for many years. Not just your television shows, but also your film work. I always when I'm watching Galaxy Quest, I always forget, like, Adam Savage worked on this, or the Matrix films, like, in addition to everything else, like, you're one of the guys behind the scenes on a bunch of my favorite movies. So I will talk your ear off someday when we're not
Excellent. I really look forward to that. I want to start with some deep cut geeking out.
Okay, let's do it.
I'm really trying to wrap my head around 2 DeLoreans behind you. I just love that.
It was never my intention. This one I bought I always wanted to own a DeLorean, and so I bought one. And this is the car in my author photo, and it's my Ghostbusters DeLorean. It's my recreation of Wade's car in the book. It's got some Ghostbusters roof rack stuff mixed in with the plutonium chamber on the back and the kit scanner on the front. So it's my recreation of the protagonist car in the book, which appeared a little bit differently in the movie adaptation. And then this was the contest car. We held a contest for the paperback release of Ready Player One that had 3 video game challenges. And the guy who, the winner of the contest, set a new world record in joust for the Atari 2600. And so he won this DeLorean, which I bought off of eBay for like 30 grand. And he had it for 4 or 5 years. And that was a lot of fun, kind of recreating the spirit of the contest in the book for fans of the book. But after he had it for 4 or 5 years, he realized it's not a very practical car, and they don't run too well, and it's a lot of upkeep. And so he decided he was going to sell it. And I decided I didn't want it to just go to somebody who didn't know the history of the car, and that it was the Ready Player One contest car. So I bought it back and gave it to my brother for a while, and he helped me turn it into this Star Wars car. I don't know if you can see, I just mounted cannons on the doors, so when the wings come up, it locks X-foils into attack position. Those are just I'm still working. That's just what I've been doing in quarantine, is working on my nerd backdrop for my virtual book tour. But yes, this is Star Wars DeLorean, Ghostbusters DeLorean. This is the double DeLorean garage. I come down here and recharge, like you in your workshop. I come down here and when I read it, recharge geek energy, I come here.
That's the thing. The piece of the workbench is a real thing. The piece of that space.
And I've got it surrounded with all my nerd stuff. Check out since it's you, I want to show you everything.
Show me everything.
My Futaba remote control is screen accurate from the. It even goes up to 88 if you want to flip it up to 88, and I think it's got sound effects. It's got a sound chip.
I have to say, when you finally see Ghostbusters Afterlife, and I haven't seen the film yet, but I worked on it, and Jason's a good pal. You're going to have some new things to add.
Oh, I can't wait. Well, one thing I added because of Ghostbusters Afterlife, when I saw the gunnery chair in the trailer, I'm like, oh, Ecto 88 needs a gunnery chair. So I put I don't know if you can see it. Let me see if I can get it. But I put neutrino wands in holsters on the doors. So when the doors come up, I've got particle throwers on each side. So I've got gunnery chairs on both sides. I'm not to brag, but
dude, that's a big swing. I love it.
What happens if you lock me up for 9 months? I'm adding stuff.
Yeah, no. We did this out, like we've tripled the content we put out, because it's all I'm doing is to come in 40 hours a week and just film whatever I'm building.
Yeah.
I wanted to start with geeking out about one of my favorite deep cut sci-fi movies that you reference in Ready Player Two, and that's Brainstorm.
Oh, it is one of my all-time favorites. And I got to meet the screenwriter of that movie, Bruce Joel Rubin, who also wrote Ghost, and he wrote Jacob's Ladder, and he wrote Deep Impact. He's an amazing dude.
All terrific movies.
Yeah, and that was Douglas Trumbull's first movie as a director.
Yep.
And just the production design and the examination of scientists discovering a new technology. That's what I love about Brainstorm. Strange Days kind of took the same technology, which I think a lot of science fiction had imagined that, but Bill Gibson had done it in, with like SimStim and Neuromancer, but earlier science fiction had imagined memory recording and playback. But I love Brainstorm because it showed the slow discovery of the technology and the way that it affected people's relationships. Same with Strange Days. It kind of took it and made it like an illegal street drug, but also showed how it would mess up people's personal lives to have access to other people's memories as playback. So I loved, and that was amazing too, because they imagined all that back in the 80s. That's like an 80s science fiction movie. And now it's, starting to come true. The brain computer interface is already in human trials, and a bunch of different companies are already working on that kind of technology. And so I'm trying to imagine in Ready Player Two where it's going to be 25 years from now. And I found from Ready Player One that I undershoot the mark. Like virtual reality happened much quicker than I thought it would, partly as a result of Ready Player One. It was almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy because the guys who worked at Oculus were taking inspiration from it. So I wrote a book about virtual reality right at a time that the technology caught up with the idea and it started to happen for real. So when I sat down to write Ready Player Two, I knew that I would want to advance that technology because I already, Ready Player One went on sale. We didn't have commercially available VR headsets. You couldn't get them.
Wow,
but now
that's amazing. Of course we didn't. Right.
I know, just 9 years. It's only been about 4 years since those rolled out. But now I use it, especially this past year. Virtual reality has been a huge blessing for me.
Me too. Yeah.
I've been trying to get Will Wheaton in there to hang out with me in VR, but he seems reticent. I think I hit him with too much. I think I started showing him the Star Trek VR where you could be on the bridge of the Enterprise D, and that was too much. So he didn't want to go back there. So
I will join both of you on anything you guys want to do. Absolutely.
Oh, that would be amazing. I heard Nathan Fillion also plays Star Trek bridge crew. So if we could get him to be our captain, then we would win.
Dude,
yeah.
I would love to get the Fireflies bridge on VR too.
It would be amazing. But what we're talking about the updating the technology. Since we have VR and I use it all the time now, it's not science fiction anymore. And imagining, and even the haptic gloves and haptic suits and the advanced VR that's imagined in Ready Player One is already coming about. People are already building those things. So I think the next step, realistically, if we're looking at where VR is going to be in 20, 25 years, it's going to be the brain-computer interface. As scary as that is, knowing that we already have it in a limited way, there's already people, visually impaired people who can see in a limited way because of cameras that are wired right into their brain. If we're already doing that and have been for years, then in a couple decades, then we'll be able to plug right into the old noodle. That's a line that I take from Brainstorm and use in Ready Player Two, but that's such a profound thing. That's the end point in the evolution of virtual reality and video games and simulation. Once you get a simulation that is indistinguishable from reality, then it doesn't ever need to get any better than that. If you can't tell the difference between the virtual and the real, then once we invent that, and once we can communicate directly to a computer with our brain, then all kinds of crazy, scary, fun and terrifying things become possible. So I love exploring all that and putting in the background of my fun action adventure pop culture treasure hunt is to have, examine that technology from the perspective of 2020.
Well, so I mean, when you sit down to write Ready Player One, and then you sat down to write Ready Player Two, you're participating in this grand tradition of science fiction authors looking at the world and trying to prognosticate, from Jules Verne all the way till now. But seeing that you undershot the mark for Ready Player One, did it make you? I'm curious if you have any more perspective when you sat down to write two about your responsibilities or about the potential that you could engender by inspiring these new visions.
Yes. Well, I definitely felt a bigger sense of responsibility because I knew I had an audience waiting to read the book.
Yeah.
An audience that included Steven Spielberg, who would call and check once in a while and see if it was done. So that's a whole completely different mindset than Ready Player One, which is just me writing my first novel to see what would happen and to see if I could finish it. And the trick that I learned or discovered accidentally writing Ready Player One, since it was my first novel, and I had written a bunch of screenplays and wanted to be a screenwriter, but my first experience getting a screenplay made, Fanboys, kind of taught me that you lose control of your work as a writer when you want to get a screenplay produced, and often nobody ever sees what you write. You know, the end product can barely resemble. And if you care about your characters or care about the story, then that made me want to try writing a novel and see what would happen if I could just geek out directly with the audience, and not have anything between me and the reader. And part of that was, it took me a long time to write Ready Player One because it's very elaborate puzzles. And
so dense,
so it took me a long time. And one of the ways that I kept myself interested in the story and kept working on it for years was by weaving all this pop culture from my own life that I loved into the story. And so whenever I would sit down to write it, I would always be writing about something that I loved, and it was a way to keep me interested in the story and engaged. And it had the side effect of keeping a lot of readers engaged in the story in a way that I didn't, anticipate or think that would translate to, all around the world. When Ready Player One came out, I discovered that, I went to Finland and Norway and Italy on book tours and discovered through translators that they had all the same arcade games, and the same TV show. American cultural imperialism had spread all around the world by the late 80s. And we all had kind of the same stuff. There was a monoculture. And that monoculture is very, deeply embedded in who we are. If you grew up in the 70s and 80s, we also had the same, fast food restaurants in our town, the same stores in our mall, the same songs on our radio, and the same maybe 24 movies at the most would come out a year. And, if you're a movie buff, you went and saw everything. So you have all these common touchstones, from our generation. And, so, and for me, that's just like when you're talking to somebody who is also a geek, it's part of how you communicate is by referencing things.
Oh, of course. It's how we find that common connection and what built us. But I'm curious, as you described the process for the first book as very organic. And obviously you want that same sort of organic output for the second one, but there's all this outside pressure. Steven Spielberg's calling you every now and then. How do you make that pressure go away?
Well, I turned off the internet and kind of, I had kind of a whirlwind experience of helping promote the movie.
Sure.
And I'd actually had to stop my initial preparations to write the book to go and promote the movie. And it wasn't just the putting the movie out of my head. It was the having seen what I write get realized, by the best special effects artists in the world. And that was really hard. That was the hardest thing to put out of my mind, was that anything I imagined could end up getting built and constructed for real, like the stacks.
The stacks.
Which was, I grew up in a trailer park, a series of trailer parks, and was in a tornado in a trailer park when I was a kid. Oh. And so trailers were something from my childhood that I wasn't necessarily fond of. But when I was imagining like a future kind of Hoovervilles, and I imagined these like the favelas in Brazil, trailers stacked on top of one another. And it was, this visual image that I had that I put in the book and ended up on the as the cover illustration for the paperback. But when I got to London, it was a real thing that they had engineers out there with cranes. They got, 50 some trailers from all over England, and then had to figure out how to make them structurally. And then when I got there, I went up into Wade's trailer all the way up to the top and into his little laundry room. That was his bedroom, and all this stuff that had just lived in my head. And now here it was, built for real. It's a really humbling, amazing thing to happen to a writer. And was so hard to put out of my head. But I could, and sometimes when I was writing Ready Player Two, it would be exhilarating to think, oh my god, if this ends up in the movie. But then I would just push that out of my head and be like, oh, it's a long shot. I just put it back in the head, back in the mindset of, I'll let the movie sort itself out if and when it happens.
Sure.
Right now, I just want to get back into that place that I was in when I wrote Ready Player One, of trying to please myself and write the kind of story that I was want to read. If I was a fan of Ready Player One, I tried to write the kind of sequel that that if I was a huge fan of the book, that I would enjoy, which was hard to do and hard to but I was ever present in my mind to not to write a sequel to the movie, and to, because I still think, however, as much as I love movies, the experience of reading a book is always going to be better than the movie, because the human imagination is still the best special effects platform there is and is ever going to be. And you bring yourself to the story. When you're reading a novel, you bring your own imagination, and you dress all the sets and you deliver the lines. And so it's a unique experience. And I think it's the writer's job to give the reader's imagination as much ammunition as they can to help tell the story with their imagination. And so putting some future potential movie in the mix, I think, is a recipe for disaster. So I just always try to put it out of my head until after I'd finished the novel. And even now, I'm still not letting myself think too much about it, because I right now I'm just enjoying, the book getting released and the story playing out in all these different readers' imaginations, because different things resonate with every reader. It's the one thing I'm missing about this experience, is getting to go out and meet fans in person and hear, have thousands of people line up to shake my hand. Can you imagine the old days when you used to shake thousands of hands and just breathe in,
to watch people kiss on cheeks in movies?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Comic-Con. I think about Comic-Con now. It's it seems like another time. And so I've been drawing on those memories a lot, because just having a virtual book tour this time from my garage. I drove these DeLoreans all over the country and would park them outside bookstores, and it was like a traveling 80s museum. So it made my book signings a lot more fun, and people could pose for photos with them. And it felt like that's become like a closure thing for me, putting out a book and getting to go out and do that. So
yeah, totally.
Yeah, I'm not getting to do that this time. So
the first book is also incredibly dense with material and references and the tendrils that it casts. I mean, you must have stepped into the writing of the second book not thinking, I'm going to replicate this density, but I'm sure you were writing the first book without thinking that there might be a second book. You're just putting everything you have into it.
Yeah.
Was there any, in starting the second book, and any bit of you like, I don't even know where to go from here? Or did you just start writing and then the natural process takes over?
I'd spent a lot of time thinking about it. Starting when I finished the first book, I'd had vague ideas of, here's what might happen afterwards. And then those kind of just continued to play out in my imagination over the, past 9 years since the first book had come out, through the process of making the movie. And then once the movie started to get made and I could see that it was really going to happen, because you never know in Hollywood.
Oh, you never know.
But I'm like, wow, this is really going to happen. And if it really happens, then there's a good chance, and it does well, which, considering the director, there's a good chance it'll do well. They'll want to make a sequel, and so I need to stop talking about writing the sequel and go ahead and do it. And I was really energized by the experience of going and seeing Steven Spielberg direct characters that I had created, and seeing all these amazing actors play them. So it was energizing too, to go back and work on the novel, because it's I think of writing a novel, it's almost like directing a movie on paper. Right. And your special effects budget is only limited by your imagination and your mastery of the language and the ideas that you can get down on the page. So I was really looking forward to it, but it was a daunting thing. My guide, I guess, with Ready Player 2 was that I kind of used a lot of my own interests and passions for Ready Player 1, because I had James Halliday's kind of age and passions mirror my own. But here, the riddles and puzzles and clues that the characters have to unlock are not based on James Halliday's interests. They're based on Kira Morrow's interest, which is Ogden Morrow's wife, and is kind of a minor character in the first book, but plays a key role in Morrow and Halliday's life, and that's kind of expanded upon here. So I tried to branch out of my own comfort zone of pop culture things, and it required me to do a lot of research on things I was not a super fan of. I've always been a huge fan of Tolkien, but I have never been a super fan of Tolkien, going all the way down the Tolkien rabbit hole, which is a deep, deep, deep rabbit hole.
It's a deep rabbit hole.
Yeah, it doesn't end, really. At some point you have to be like, I think I got it. But so that was, and Prince as well. I've always loved Prince's music, but I've never been gotta know everything there is about Prince. Yeah. And so for a time period, my wife and my family were just subjected to nonstop Prince movies and music.
What's wrong with that?
And then I went into a Tolkien, like, I guess we're done with Prince now. And he's talking about, the first age of Middle Earth nonstop. It's like, this is not even the stuff that's in the movies, it was a weird, but that was fun for me to get to geek out on things and have a reason to geek out on things that I necessarily had not fully geeked out on.
Right. It's like the author's, it's your version of the author traveling to Hong Kong because they're writing about Hong Kong and they need to know about this.
Yeah. Yes. I had to travel into the land of Prince super fans. Luckily, I have some friends who are Prince super fans and they were able to, but I still invariably, I've made mistakes. I've made Tolkien mistakes. I've made Prince mistakes. I want to apologize to everybody watching who spotted mistakes.
Your fans must delight in finding mistakes.
Oh, I go over it. You can miss something, but I'm shameless. I will correct stuff once I find out about mistakes. Let my publisher know. I'm going to make Will go back and re-record stuff because I made mistakes. Somehow I said Batman came out in 1990 instead of 1989, and I'll never live down the shame. I don't even know how I missed that. So I'm going to fix it.
I wrote this question out, and I'm going to actually have to read it because it's hard for me to remember the wording. But I realize that you play in this very interesting space between utopia and dystopia. And while a lot of people talk about what you've written as a dystopia, it's very utopic in its assumptions about what's possible with technology. Okay, here's how I wrote it. A utopia in terms of what's possible with technology, and a dystopia in terms of what's possible with technology.
Yes.
It's like you've written this coin in which we're watching all the good and all the bad that it can do. Was that conscious in your idea of taking a look at our culture through that lens?
Yes, because that's how I feel about technology and the internet. I have a love-hate relationship with the internet. And it's that way with a lot of technology. Like, we don't discover the bad things about a technology sometimes until a decade or two after we've developed it, and only then. Like with social media, only now do we begin to see the sociological and psychological effects that it's having on us as individuals and as a population. And sometimes, the technology is made with the best intentions, medical applications or communication or just connecting people. But then once it's implemented and once it, becomes part of our lives, only then do we see the bad side of it after we've already become addicted to the good side of it. So I wanted to show that in Ready Player One, show how technology can save people and connect them with their friends, but also you can, like anything humans do, we can do it to excess and do it too much, especially if it's an escape and life is hard. Then that's a strong impulse, and it's something that humans are always battling with. Is our relationship with our tools. That's what I love about 2001. It's about humanity's relationship with its tools, and as its tools gets more advanced and it has more of a problem, where HAL 9000 becomes our most advanced tool, and it's built to help us, but it gets out of control because it gets too complex. So it makes that mission to Jupiter possible, but then there's a dark side to the technology.
I got to thank you for giving me that insight, because I'd never thought of that before. But of course, you're right. The bone in the beginning is both a positive building block and a source of destruction. And so is HAL. It had never occurred to me. Thank you for blowing my mind.
That movie always continues to blow my mind. And I continue to draw inspiration from it. I'm not one of those people who hides his inspirations. Like, I admit when I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. I couldn't have written Ready Player 2 if it wasn't for Brainstorm and Strange Days and Neuromancer, the whole Sprawl trilogy, but also Snow Crash. Snow Crash is a huge influence on me. Other writers had examined virtual reality for me, but what amazes me about what William Gibson did and Neil Stephenson is they both did that before the birth of the modern internet. William Gibson wrote Neuromancer on a typewriter.
Yeah.
And Snow Crash was written in the mid 90s before we saw kind of the rise of the modern internet. So when I was writing about the Oasis and Ready Player One, I had the benefit of World of Warcraft and EverQuest and Ultima Online, having seen real virtual worlds spring up, persistent virtual worlds that were always there. And working in IT, I would see people just descend into these sort of virtual worlds and be gold farming all day, and also meet people and fall in love and form really strong friendships through their avatars. So it was already really happening when I was writing Ready Player One in like a scaled down way. So it was easy to imagine how decades in the future, the more realistic the virtual world gets, the more appealing it will, and the worse the real world gets due to neglect, then the more appealing the virtual would be. I always thought about that watching the Matrix movies. I was like, wow, if the machines wouldn't need to enslave us. If you made a virtual reality that was that convincing and good, and then sold admission, we would willingly emigrate.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
But this is one of the reasons, and I'm going to run this theory by you, why I think it's very reasonable to assume that we're living in a simulation, because the writing right now is really bad.
Yeah.
The writing for reality is a little like Murder Hornet.
Yes.
I think they're overdoing it. I think the writer's room for 2020 needs an overhaul.
Well, I had the opposite feeling in 2018. I was like, okay, my life is clearly a simulation, because there's no way things are going this good. Oh, Steven Spielberg's going to make my first novel into a movie. And then Star Wars, I think Last Jedi took our release date, so they had to bump the release date ahead 3 months from December to March, and it landed on my birthday. So Ready Player One movie came out on my 46th birthday, and we premiered it at South by Southwest here in my hometown. So Steven Spielberg and the whole cast and crew came to my town, and we showed it at the Paramount Theater downtown. I was just like, it's all downhill from here. I might as well just accept that it's just a slow fade. The best has already happened, and I'll just sit here with my 2 DeLoreans and just reminisce about it, because it'll never be topped.
I keep forgetting to tell you, do you know how Brainstorm was originally supposed to be projected?
Yes, they shot it in multiple different film formats, and then it would go to like Panavision Super Scope.
Show scan, the 60 frames per second show scan
on those POV. That's still some of the best POV virtual reality. I would love to see Brainstorm ported into virtual reality.
Oh yes,
now in 3D. Wouldn't that be amazing to put it on and experience those first person 3D?
The roller coaster and the car taking off the.
Oh yeah, so great. And even the stuff about the way that it examines sex and the way that any new technology is immediately used for pornography, and distribution of it. Like as soon as photography is invented, it's immediately. And I love that too. Like before it even gets out of the lab, like somebody's already like splicing an orgasm and putting it on.
Realistic how happenstance all of those occurrences were, and how human. It's also the first movie that helped me understand how a product gets iterated.
Oh yeah.
Right? From it's a long-term goal for me to build at some point the first iteration of the machine.
Oh yeah.
I totally want to make one.
I always wondered if Doc Brown's mind reading helmet was inspired by.
Yeah. Also Egon's one of the shield.
Oh yeah, with the salad container. Yeah. Very similar design.
These cultural touchstones that are such part of the lingua franca of your books, they make me want to ask a question, and I'm not sure if I have a specific question, but it's a bailiwick of mine, which is gatekeeping, which is a very nerdy pastime.
Yes.
In addition to looking for common cultural references and competing to go deeper and deeper and deeper, I would, if you gave me one wish, it would be to eliminate gatekeeping across the whole world. And I'm curious if the process of writing the books and the public response has changed or altered or deepened your feelings about gatekeeping.
It has, because Wade engages in some gatekeeping in the first book, and I wanted to do that to show how gatekeeping as a result of his own fear and his own he's carved out this little fiefdom for himself. I'm good at this one thing, and other people who don't take it seriously or to the insane level of seriousness that he takes it, he's threatened by that, And I wanted, Wade is a very flawed character because he's a teenager dumped into this global computer network that he's not, prepared for. none of us are, I think, prepared for the internet, regardless of what stage. We're lucky enough to live without the internet and then live through its adoption and slowly kind of get boiled like a frog with the internet. But like kids now get just dumped onto the internet, and it's a huge shock. And I think kids who grow up on the internet still, it's a process of making becoming familiar with the real world as it is, or it seems on the internet, which it's not the same as reality, and then having to make their way out into the real world and thinking that they know what reality is. So I wanted to show all that with Wade, but gatekeeping is definitely a part of it. And it comes from, we see gatekeeping outside of the geek world too, obviously. It's a way to, I think it's just people protecting their own, self-esteem in some ways, because they feel they have some sense of pride because of their knowledge in some certain field. And then when other people, don't know, it's a way to build themselves up, but also knock other people down, which I'm definitely against. What I love, that's not what I love about pop culture at all. What I love is the way that it connects people, and the way that shared enthusiasm for something, regardless of what it is, Doctor Who or Star Trek or Harry Potter, the way that if you meet somebody else who loves that, like it's an instant connection between the two of you, and then you speak your own secret language and you talk about, which parts you love, which, characters you hate, all of that. It connects people and does what good art should do, which is let you know that you're not alone. Like all of good art for me, music, cinema, literature, is like people sharing their own experience, with our existential dilemma with being human, and putting it into a piece of art and then putting it out into the world. And when other people absorb that art, the story or the painting or whatever it is, and connect with it, then it lets them know that they're not alone, and that another human being had a similar experience or saw things in a similar way as you, or connected with a piece of art, the same way that you did. It's what fills me with like hope and joy and the connected human experience. And pop culture is just, people call it pop culture, but to me it's pop art. And it's the only culture that I've ever really had growing up in America is popular culture. I've been exposed to high culture, but the culture that's always resonated with me is popular culture.
I really appreciate the shift in Wade's character from effectively David to Goliath between the first book and the second book. And I'm wondering how much it grids on your experience. And I would tell a little personal story. I remember early on in Mythbusters tenure, we went to Comic-Con, and I did a panel at one of the big halls, and it sold out. It felt totally amazing. And I went back and had an argument with my wife, like you do sometimes. It's a part of a relationship. And I remember after we sort of settled the argument, I said, man, it's so weird that like I can go and speak to 4,000 people and feel amazing and then feel so shitty 10 minutes later. My wife was like, tell me what one of those things has to do with the other. And I was like, oh my God, of course, you're totally right. Like you have to go through that journey. So I'm curious about your experience after the first book, putting some of that knowledge into Wade.
Well, it was, it did occur to me when I was sitting down to write Ready Player 2, is like, oh, I have kind of been through what Wade has been through in a very scaled down way. I was not well known when my first novel came out, and then I've slowly kind of gained notoriety. And then once I got lucky enough to work with Steven Spielberg, that was the real experience for me. Then I got to see what it was like to be around somebody who's really famous, like famous to everyone all around the world, and who everybody, like when your last name becomes synonymous with your job, that's how you know you really killed it. And so but also getting to meet him and seeing how kind he is, and how kind he was to me when I met him, because he could tell, because I think everybody who meets Steven Spielberg, and it must have been this way for years, everybody who meets him, it's the biggest day of their life, and they're just vibrating with energy, and they just got a haircut, and their wardrobe is overthought, and they're coming in, with these things that they want to say to let them know what a big fan he is. And he manages to set people. I've seen him do it again and again with me and with other people, set you at ease and let you know that he's a real person, and then start talking about the collaboration. And then once, he starts talking about movies, and especially our movie, then it's just infectious enthusiasm. So I learned a lot, just by seeing the way people treat famous people, very famous people, but also the way that they have to build, a certain barriers around themselves just to protect their own family and their own, sense of self. And I saw that to some degree with myself. It was, it's a slow, gradual process. And I wanted to feed that into Wade. Wade had so many things stacked against him. When I revisited this character, people see the end of the first book as like a happy ending, and I see it as a moment of happiness and a victory, but huge problems confronting these characters, not the least of which is they're teenagers and they've just inherited control of Google, Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, all rolled into one. And Wade is an agoraphobic, internet nerd, video game addict, shut-in, who really just met this girl he's in love with in person for the first time in the closing pages of the book. So I knew, just from my own relationship experience in my 20s, some people get lucky and meet their true love in high school, but most people have to go through a growing and learning process through relationships, learning how to be a good partner and learning what kind of partner they want to have and all of that. And Wade is still got to work through all of that. And then the big problem is that I knew he had very different, he and Samantha, Artemis, had very different ideas about how this technology should be used in the first book. And once it gets ramped up to the brain-computer interface in Ready Player Two, I'm like, oh, they're going to totally disagree about that. And that's going to be what drives a wedge, through their relationship. So I wanted, I kind of, by design, made Wade into a jerk in the opening Ready Player Two, because I wanted to show how absolute power corrupts absolutely. And he does not, James Halliday's first contest wasn't designed to pick somebody who was right for the job. Halliday designed it to pick somebody just like him. And Wade has become just like him. He's living in the guy's house, and he's wearing his avatar's old clothes in the Oasis. And he's also isolated himself from all of his friends. So he's won the contest and won all this stuff that he had always wanted, but he still, he still hasn't grown up in a lot of ways. And O&I kind of helps him grow up in some ways, but also retards his growth at the same time, where he gets to, he learns a lot of things about empathy by being in other people's shoes, but still, doesn't have a lot of experience interacting with people directly. He's living out other people's experiences with other people and trying to learn from that. It's like trying to learn how to interact with people by watching movies, which is something I feel like I did when I was a kid. When I grew up in a small town, and the whole world, before the internet, the whole world just kind of reached me through movies and music. And I remember, watching movies with adults, watching their behavior, to kind of learn how adults act. And so that was something that I thought, if you could record and play back human experience, it would open up all this potential for learning things and learning how things feel from other people's perspective. And it could foster empathy, but it would also become really immediately perverted and used in all kinds of horrifying ways, and used for both good and bad applications. So that would be beneficial and also potentially catastrophic. And I always try to show both sides of technology, because that's our relationship with it, is good and bad and evolving. We're always trying to, as we invent things, we're always trying to rein them in as we invent them.
I kept on hearing Harrison Ford from Blade Runner saying, like any other machine, it's a benefit or a hazard. And if it's
yes, exactly. Yeah.
I want to ask you to wrap this up. We've had a dystopia of a year,
Sure.
and as a crafter, somewhat crafter of dystopias, I'm curious about where you find hope right now.
In art, I find hope in also just watching people persevere in the face of really bad news day after day for a long time, and seeing the way that people connect and use technology to connect the way that we're doing right now. Like, I think in a lot of ways, technology and the internet has shown its ugliest side and its most beneficial side this year. Like, we've seen how it can keep us all connected, even when we can't be physically connected, and become a way for us to still feel like we're sharing our lives, even though we physically can't. But it's also revealed itself this past year, the internet and social media specifically, to be a really effective brainwashing tool, and a way that can already put people in their minds in control of a machine to some degree, and allow them to live in a reality that is disconnected from the one the rest of us are living in. So in a lot of ways, yeah, we're already dealing with that. You know, I get hope from seeing the way all the different artists deal with this, and thinking about all the art that people are making during this time. You know, I think next year, in 2021 and in the years following, we'll start to see all of this amazing quarantine made art that people have been, because every artist that I know or writer, like this is the time to, confront those projects where you're like, oh, when am I ever going to get time to do that? Well, if you're not going to do it this year, then you might as well kiss it up to God. So I've gone and finished writing projects I've had kicking around for 5 or 6 years, just because like, oh, I'm going to go ahead and finish that now that I have time. And I think that's going to be the case with a lot of, musicians and other artists and films, and so much interesting. Like, I think that's going to help us start to process this experience too, is once all of our great filmmakers and writers and artists start to weave this into fiction and show other characters living through what we've all lived through individually, that's when we'll all start to have a communal sense of what we all went through together. It still feels very, I think we all still feel very disconnected from each other because we are still physically disconnected from each other. So my hope is looking forward to everybody kind of reconnecting physically, but also through the process of art and the way that life informs art, and then when the art gets out into the world, then it informs people's lives.
I really appreciate that. I think you're absolutely right about that. I think that humans do have an unbelievable ability to persevere. Ernie, thank you so much for sharing your DeLoreans.
My pleasure. Thank you. I had a blast talking with you. When we can, we'll have to get together in person. Whenever you're in Austin, you got to come hang out. We'll travel back in time.